This is from Wits Tits, a novelette, an irreverent breast cancer journey, and a very odd but honest book based on true stories. Chapter 3. Back when I was wee. People say you should let go of the past, but it's always easier to say that to other people. Like, do you let go of your childhood, or think of only the great things? To me, this is like forgetting where I came from, which I have done before, and it became a stranger than strange experience. Besides, where's the humility in that? We lack a proper humility these days, I think. Everything must be so shiny, or else let's not talk about it. Or if we do, let us say how very unshiny it is. But this is not how proper problem-solving is done, which, while I don't really agree with the idea oftentimes that there are any problems at all, a conversation for another time, if you want to solve a supposed problem, you do well to look at all sides. When I say you, I truly mean me, of course, or, as the awkward alternative goes, if one wants to solve a supposed problem, one must look at the problem or it will never be solved, and more likely the problem will solve you. Or me, or one. I think the general consensus is that cancer is a problem, though. Look up all the stats you want, but when it is your own body being poisoned, cut, and burned to save your life, there's going to be a different perspective. But I still think we all agree mostly that cancer is not a solution, but a problem. If you can imagine it, as I moved closer in time to treatment and procedures that came before treatment, I found myself slowly scooting back inside myself, as if there was some kind of living space toward the back of me that had not been occupied before, not quite like this. Then in the front of me was everything that had bubbled up to the surface by root of experience and intense pressure to respond. Things I thought I had most certainly resolved with my logic before now burned at me as if to say in all capital letters, "Speak your truth or die." Well, what do you say to that but to throw off all your outer clothes and take one long deep dive into waters where there is no clear bottom? Either way, it might be the end anyway. But certainly this way I can say that I took that deep dive and I resolved what needed to be resolved in me, and from this point on would interact with the world and myself very differently. I tried to work, but I found that it required a kind of focus that burned hot inside me, and that along with the poison working to disrupt the rapidly dividing cells, some of which would grow back like my hair and nails and digestive tract perhaps, but I'm not sure at this hour. It seems like a lot, and it certainly feels like a lot too. It was a relief to find that love of life required me to step outside of the normal course of life so that I might save my life. And that was a strategy I believe Ayn Rand also said in Atlas Shrugged. Or was it Unshrugged? I don't think so. It was a relief because it meant I did love life so much I would not risk it by doing anything less than put 100% focus on understanding what my mind, body, and heart needed in order to become a healthier version of my then self. I decided that if I could change anything, I would see about doing that willingly, and then if something could not be changed, perhaps it was very important that it stay just as is, and slowly I pieced myself back together in a new arrangement. Have you heard that wisdom that says if change is the only constant, then change is the only value? Hugh MacLeod. Very profound. But is change the only constant? Some people do not get excited when the music changes and we do a different dance. I speak metaphorically, of course. This used to concern me, but then I realized some of us are ready to do the dance, even when it means turning the stumbles into dances, and others of us are not ready, and this is why some of us are where we are, and others of us are in other places. In other words, as the lovely silver lettering on the big black mama's shirt at the diagnostics lab said, MYOB, she laughed and said this was to remind She laughed and said this was to remind herself to mind her own business, a reminder that I took to heart as well, because people can bother my sensitive nature so intensely with certain things that suddenly all their deep business became my business, because I was determined to get to the root of things. Funny though, the root of things often seemed to come back to me, and so I was delighted when I found at Hobby Lobby a little pendant that said, "Slay your own dragons." This would remind me, and anyone reading it. But back when I was a wee babe, I laughed with my mouth wide open. When I was called a freckle fart, I dreamed at night my freckles turned into chocolate, and I ate them off, and I had no problem challenging someone many times my size, until I grew tired of their responses and retreated into my internal attic where I would think up stories to one day write. Or not. I couldn't help the desire to make a mark on the world with colored pencils or fancy pens, and explore the good and evil in it with some kind of silliness that turned out to be very dangerous at times. Who would think that laughter can be such a power? Well, it can be. I recall an interesting but also disturbing story of my old hero, Shirley Temple, being presented with the contents of a man's pants when she was very little. It was the first she had ever seen of such a thing in her life, and so she laughed and laughed, and he told her to get out. Brilliant. The contents of men's pants, and women's pants for that matter, are still very much a feature in today's world, which gives me lots to think about. I was going to say loads, but lots is better. Personally, I think that it is a good childhood where one is taught the parts of the body and is not taught to be ashamed of them. Shame is not one of our highest qualities, truly, and it comes with more toxins than many of our other sentiments. Perhaps it was the shame I accumulated through life and the unusual decisions I made that sent my mitochondria into a kind of energetic frenzy where they just did somersaults until they turned some of us into tumors. A kind of severe disconnection with the natural order of things, but strangely, a solution provided by nature, I started to think. It was some book I had read that talked about how cancer is the body trying to isolate the toxins that have been floating around. God, I don't even remember this moment which book it was, but I have them all on my Kindle. It seemed pretty clear to me the toxins from my stress were great, and I had worked so hard to keep from becoming more toxic, but life as a wandering wanderer of sorts made it very difficult, even with the best of my attitudes. Back when I was wee, I had a life that was filled with adventure and storytelling. Not many get to travel the world at such a young age. Not many get to see the things I saw or read the things I read. Not many get to feel the weight of a little one on your own still childish hip, to cook for someone else before eating for yourself. But as long as I was busy and had time to do some kind of playing and speak my mind now and then, I just sat and watched and imagined better stories. I also was homeschooled, but in this sense I was so good at teaching myself that eventually I got the job, and at times studied as my younger sister or brother napped. I was privileged enough to be trusted to look after another human being even while I was so little, and I took this very seriously, most of the time. Other times I remember leaving boogers in protest behind the couch. Then one day the boogers had formed a sort of pattern, and I thought I should feel bad about it, and I sort of did, only because it was not a pretty thing to do, and while I didn't mind being boisterous or horsing around or hanging upside down on the monkey bars, I could see myself feeling bad for bringing more ugliness to this world behind the couch from my nose. But if only I was not so annoyed by the grown-ups.